Yeah, right. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Matthias. We got Daniel here. Today we're going to look at some data studio tips, a little bit about me. That's my face there. I have been in B2B software for almost the whole of my professional life. And yeah, built a couple of companies. And currently we're helping performance marketers and data engineers to achieve the goals by providing data pipelines and attribution. Yeah, I have met Daniel on LinkedIn. We decided to do this. Main reason is because what we do is technical, touches SEO to a certain extent, and because his content was pretty spot on in terms of advanced data studio functions and tips and tricks. And here we are. Thanks for joining.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, my name's Daniel. I'm the SEO lead at Impression. I've got 6 years of digital marketing experience, specifically within SEO. And my kind of core USP within SEO is automation, whether that be by harnessing key technologies for things like machine learning, but in particular reporting, which is what we're going to talk about today. And a little bit about Impression. So we work with kind of global brands. We're based in the UK, specifically Nottingham, and where I'm now at the moment in London. We kind of cover like every single digital marketing channel. I don't think there's anything else there that we don't capture. But yeah, at the moment, my specific remit is SEO. And here's just a list of the typical agency slide on the clients we work with and some of our awards. So why do you need advanced reporting? So when I say advanced reporting, it's not because it's super advanced in terms of how to interpret it. It's actually using advanced techniques in order to quantify data. Why is that important? Because SEO is hard and it's getting harder just because of the amount of data that we have to use. And the anecdote I always have is if key stakeholders come to us or, within your business and they say, how's SEO doing or how's our rankings going? If you have to pull out a humongous dashboard or a 500-row spreadsheet, then that's not really going to work. You need to be able to kind of take away anecdotes from a report and then they'd be able to actually interpret that essentially. And this is where some of these advanced techniques come in that I'll go through in a second. But it's also important that this isn't the be all and end all. This is kind of like a lot of quick stuff you can do. And we are actually going to do a blog after this as well. So if you don't quite follow bits of this, because there's bits of code and stuff in there, then it will all be available online. And also alternatively, if you want to message me, I can quickly send them over. And here's what Windsor AI do.
Yeah, so we provide data pipelines for Data Studio. So you want to connect any data source into Data Studio, that's us. Give us a try. Slide number 2. We also provide data pipelines into data warehouse. If you're a bit more advanced and feel like having data in your data warehouse, then we provide the same connectors into data destinations in that way.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I'll get onto this later in the deck. Is some of the more advanced techniques you're going to have to kind of utilize data warehousing, especially for things like forecasting, etc. You're not going to be able to do that all in the Data Studio platform. You're going to need like a key cloud system essentially for developers and stuff to use. So this is kind of where Windsor AI is really good at using. Not to praise them too much. So cool. So from what I'm going to cover today, the main thing is going to be about calculated fields. The reason I'm focusing on this part is because you can it's kind of quick and easy to do if you want to follow. Now, I'm going to assume that everyone in this has used Data Studio or is somehow familiar with it, but I'll kind of go through just the basics of calculated fields, especially in terms of using regex as well. So what is a calculated field? So essentially a calculated field allows you to create your own dimensions. Now you don't have to worry about whatever you do in Data Studio affecting how your data warehousing is. whatever you do in GDS, that will be in GDS. So feel free to experiment with calculated fields. It's not actually going to change the data in the connector, essentially. And I think a lot of the stuff I'm going to go through now kind of applies to the kind of Google's first party connectors, specifically Search Console and Analytics. But if you are using any sort of third party connectors or APIs, it can apply to that too. So just in terms of how to set up, if you've got your data source, just quickly edit the data source and add a field, and you'll be provided with this lovely box. Now, categorization using regex is kind of what we're going to go through. So as you can see here, it might, if you're not familiar with this, it might look a bit unfamiliar at first, but essentially I'm going to break down what each bit means. Everything usually starts with a case, so that's where you're defining one or more conditions, and it returns as a result when a condition is met. You can define a default result if none of the conditions is met, which is what the else tag is. So essentially the else tag is if you've defined all the things you want to do, categorize, else is basically what is left behind. And that's really good if you want to refine anything you're categorizing. And also every bit of regex expression when you've got a case function has to end with the end function. When is a condition you want to evaluate? You can have multiple when clauses in a single case expression. There is a limit of how many you can add. I think it's definitely over 90 that you can add in there. And obviously, the more you add, it might be actually slower in terms of how your Data Studio report is generated. So I'd always try and add as much you can in a single line rather, having a landing page for every single case you're doing. And here is where you can add your specific regular expression you want to use. You can use extract, which takes that information from any element. You've got match, which matches it exactly. And you've got replace as well. And the one I've used there is contains, which is kind of the one I always use because I'm a bit lazy with regex. I'd rather just go like, oh, it just contains this, rather than having to add too much complication into it. And then also you've got the you set the dimension, so that's the dimension in the connections that you've already got, how you want each connection to be labeled, and the parameter of that condition. So here is some instances about how you can use each one, and this one is probably the easiest one to do, and it's branded versus non-branded. So essentially, all you need to do there is replace the condition with your brand. Now, you might want to have a look at any malformations in that, such as spelling errors, etc., that you might want to in there. You never know, based on experience, you look in Search Console, you'll add your brand, and then you'll see actually there's lots of like malformations of that, so you want to add those in. And then else is non-branded. So what you're doing is you're splitting out your branded footprint and then the rest of it. Now, why is that very useful? So it's useful in multiple ways. From an SEO standpoint, what it's actually great for is looking at any long tail branded queries that you are appearing for, but you don't actually have any content. So for instance, we get loads of stuff where, there's plenty of queries that people ask about a brand and there's no content on the site that the brand has that they're actually looking for this. So it's great at looking at that. Another thing it's really good for from a paid standpoint, say for instance, if you've got quite a high CTR for branded terms and you're bidding on your branded paid activity, you can look at actually experimenting with that. And this is where the branded report really comes in handy. It's not always foolproof because I think there's steps in the journey that people don't quite calculate, but it's always worth trying, and you can reduce kind of like your brand spend by looking at that. But yeah, that's just some of the cases that you can use this for. But it's also just very good to see, how's your branded search doing? Is it up 1 month? Is it down? It's really cool for looking at that. And obviously I've used a pie chart here, but doing it reactively and using a line graph is also very helpful too. The next one is categorizing intent. So this is a difficult one just based on how you want to set out logistically how you match up intent. And for people who aren't familiar with keyword intent, it's basically like what's the user purpose for typing in a query. Traditionally it is split between informational, which is kind of evergreen, usually requires quite long form content. There's commercial, which is usually where in the user journey where someone's kind of like they're in the buyer journey where they're looking at stuff, they're not quite ready to buy, but they're kind of comparing between two different things. And then there's transactional, which is obviously, you know, they're ready to purchase your product or your services. And yeah, it's but it all depends on how you want to logistically set that out. Once you've done that as well, what you probably find is with the else clause, you probably have a ton that's under other. Now, what you want to do with this is filter down to what queries are coming under other, and then essentially go through and refine your categorization. So say, for instance, you see a query that has been bucketed under other, and you need to think, okay, does that go under informational or commercial? And then just keep doing that until other is really reduced. The other thing I get asked a lot about that as well is where branded fits in, because probably naturally you'll think, oh, should there be a branded intent? But that depends on your vertical and your brand, because I would say most of the time, if it's branded, largely it's going to come under transactional. But there's also different queries that can be associated with your branded queries. It all depends on what those queries look like, and yeah, what you do as a business. What you can do with that is really cool. So not only can you do that for reporting, but you can actually use that to strategize where to kind of approach your activity. One of the things I like to do is bucket keyword difficulty. So if we know, for instance, that we've got a load of transactional terms where the keyword difficulty is quite low, we might want to prioritize that because the ROI is going to be quicker rather than something that's kind of up there. Usually with intent, commercial and transactional keywords are usually more competitive. So they're kind of hard to kind of rank in those areas. So what you want to do is kind of, you don't want to just dismiss it and then just put all your money informational, although that is totally justifiable from an SEO standpoint, as it usually has the most search volume. But you can kind of like essentially build out a prioritization matrix on the keywords and topics you want to target. And it's a good way to kind of cluster that. But you can use this for Search Console as well, and any kind of APIs just to kind of bucket those queries. It all kind of works the same. So yeah, it's a really interesting way. But as I mentioned, you don't have to use the way that I've kind of bucketed the intent, and also you might have other steps in the intent that you kind of discovered in your keyword research. But this is a good like foundational thing that you can use. The other one is subfolder reporting. So this one was actually quite quick and easy. I won't go into detail explaining this regular expression, but essentially what this will do is break down each bit of your top level directory of your site. And I'll go on into a second why that's interesting. And then also if you add another string in the calculated fields, you can break down the directories even more. So you can look at things like second level directories, etc. So why do you want to use this? So not only is it good for reporting to see, you know, what areas of your site are doing well, one of the things I find it's really good for is international SEO, especially if you've got a large domain where you're targeting different markets, and that's been split out by the different subfolders. Because essentially what you can do then is if you have the country dimension and then the subfolder dimension, you can see where there's a mismatch, which I've crudely illustrated there. So if you have a load of UK users going to the US subfolder, essentially with this report, you'll be able to see, okay, what landing pages are these? Is it a case that we need to add a hreflang? And for anyone that's not kind of averse in international SEO, hreflang essentially tells Google that this page is for this market and this page is for this market. Now, if you don't have those, what you can see happen is either Google, especially if they're the same language, Google will see them as duplicate content. One will get indexed kind of over the other, or what will usually happen as well is you'll have users going to the wrong country. Say, for instance, like I've said there, you'll get UK users going to the US folder. So it's really good for doing that. And also, if you've got a landing page that's getting loads of users from not the target market, then you know you need to transcreate the page, add that to your target market, and then add the hreflang. So that's kind of where I find this kind of reporting is really useful for kind of if you're doing international SEO, and kind of essential as well, because it kind of gives you a better overview of how you're doing in that regards. So in terms of some more advanced tricks, so those are the kind of things you can, as I mentioned, you can do within just box standard Data Studio. Where you can go further is, as Windsor AI guys say, is with the data warehousing stuff. Now, if you do that, there's loads of stuff you can do beyond this. One of my favorite things to do, which I've given an example there, is use forecasting. And you can imagine like how cool that is if you do that in real time as well. Well, not in real time, not every day. That's kind of stupid. But if you do it like monthly and use different sort of technologies to do that, my favorite at the moment is Facebook Profit, just because it's simple to use and you can get things like the lower yield, the upper yield, and kind of the medium. And that gives you a good idea to clients and also to businesses about where the trajectory of their organic traffic is going. The other thing as well is harnessing machine learning. Now, one of the things I didn't mention, and I wouldn't recommend doing via regex, is keyword clustering, especially if you're using something like Search Console, just because with Data Studio, when you have the connector, it doesn't have, if people familiar with Search Console will know, if you just use Search Console, the export is 1,000 rows. With GDS, there is no limit, so it will literally export everything. So if you want to be able to keyword cluster that, it's better to use machines to do that, because it will take too much time. Tagging keywords is annoying for any SEO anyway. And with machine learning as well, you kind of have that always on the go. And because you've got that kind of data warehouse there, the machine has a better understanding of your vertical and better to kind of cluster these keywords. Another one is entity extraction, which is a little bit complicated, but is good for kind of, if you don't want to kind of do like machine learning or keyword tagging, you can use things like Google's natural language API to look at the content on the page and go, I think this content is about this. And that is really good if you want to tag up content for your site or your blog, and you want to do that at scale. But yeah, there's as soon as you utilize kind of more of the data warehousing side of things, there's kind of no limit to how much you can do with that. And yeah, I would really recommend like looking at the stuff that Windsor AI put out there and looking at, you know, some key people in the industry who kind of use this stuff, because yeah, I think all of this stuff is, as I mentioned before, we need to be able to do this because SEOs need to be better at creating those kind of executive summaries of performance, especially in terms of the categorization side of things. But also, as I mentioned before, being able for non-SEOs to take away those key anecdotes without having to bring out like a huge dashboard or a 1,000-row spreadsheet, etc. And yeah, that's kind of it. Are there any questions? If there's no questions, Windsor AI guys, I didn't know if you had any questions.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, hi there. I just have a normal question as I'm starting my career in SEO and I have my first job. So I just wanted to ask you one question, is that what all other programming software do I have to learn to ace my SEO, like Python, AI, machine learning, like what else stuff I need to learn in terms of to top SEO?
So in terms of the machine learning side of things,
supporting my SEO career, what all other programming language, what all other things should I learn?
I would say if you're doing that, I would definitely learn Python, just in terms of being able to do that at scale. But also I would say with Python, you need the data visuals in it aren't as good as GDS. So what is really good with Python is you can kind of extract the stuff you do in Python, if it's the things around machine learning, connect that to your data warehousing solution and then plug that into Data Studio. But if you want to get into the kind of SEO innovation side of things in terms of machine learning, I would say Python is definitely the one you want to learn, just because of its scalability and ease of use. The other one to kind of look at is R programming. Now, I'm biased. I'm not a massive fan of it, but it does have a better visualizations than Python. But yeah, definitely, if you want to get into that, and if few people to recommend on that is people like Andrea Valpini at WordLift. He does a lot of cool stuff with the machine learning side of things and posts a lot of kind of shareable notebooks that you can use. And also J.R. Oakes at Locomotive Agency. He's really cool. I think he's understated at how cool he is with some of this SEO stuff. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you so much.
Cool. Someone's put any resource to read about case and regex you can use specifically for SEO with GDS. Not from the top of my head, but I think there's loads of actual Google documentation. If you look at their recommendations in terms of Data Studio and the regex expressions, you can see some key examples they've used, and it can probably inspire you in terms of like what to do next with that. Someone's asked a question about what is the benefit of Windsor over other integration tools? Windsor AI, guys. I don't know if you want to tackle that one.
Well, we have about 50 connectors at the moment, and yeah, you can easily stream the data. You connect the data once and stream it into all of your tools, so you don't need to reset up the data integration like with other tools. And we also do attribution, which is quite a key topic for many performance marketers. Yeah.
Someone's asked if GSC data will all flow in GDS, then what's the best way to get data in GDS from GSC otherwise? Good question. So you can actually use this is kind of where the data warehousing things come in, because yeah, you can. What will happen if you're doing lots of categorization fields in GDS, it will slow it down. So what is, depending on how much data you have, what is probably better is doing that via data warehousing, which I'm sure you can do via Windsor AI or Google Cloud. So all that categorization is done already before it enters the Data Studio dashboard. But it's worth playing around with, if you're kind of new to this, it's worth probably doing it first in GDS to see what you can get, and then looking at kind of the other integration tools that you can plug in.
Yeah, maybe adding on to this, one good way is like, let's say you pump all your Search Console data into BigQuery, and then you do a case statement and create maybe a view with the data from the initial table. So then you basically have the data formatted in the right way before you import it into Data Studio. That is especially working with a lot of data, speeding things up quite a bit, because querying the Search Console API heavily will result in a lot of errors.
Yeah, there's also there's this Search Console inspection API that's just come out that I've had loads of people querying, you know, how can we kind of integrate this into Data Studio? And you do have to think about like, what's the API limits? Because I think for the inspection URL API is 2,000 per, I think it's 2,000 per day. So if you've got a particularly large site, that's probably not doable to use that. Someone's asked, do you see data sampling often, and how is it possible to avoid it except using shorter timeframes, especially with data from Google Analytics? Yeah, it's a tricky one. It depends what version of analytics you're using, whether it's 360 or just the normal version. With particularly in this instance with Search Console, it's not really, the issue you have with Search Console is obviously it's not in real time. There is obviously a delay about, I think it's about 3 days. Sometimes it can be longer depending on like Google's data warehousing essentially. But with analytics and stuff, yeah, I think it all comes back to, again, like data warehousing. Because yeah, if you're just going to use the first party connector and you're dealing with a lot of data, then yeah, you might have an occurrence of, you know, lots of data sampling, etc. But it all depends on, yeah, what you're dealing with essentially.
Maybe maybe adding on to this Google Analytics sampling question, with our connector, for example, when you extract the data, the connector backs off if the sampling is noticed, and then he keeps reloading in smaller increments. And then you push that data, for example, into BigQuery or a Snowflake data warehouse, unsampled, and then from there you can consume it in any destination, like Data Studio being one of them. I think there is many connectors out there. Some of them can do this desampling, but definitely if you have, I think, more than 1 million hits in a month, you will run into sampling with GA. Also with GA 360, we have seen sampled data, so it can happen. Yeah, it happens quite frequently with larger properties on GA.
Cool. And Robert has asked about a bug with the scorecards when you use the branded categorization field. Robert, I'm not too sure on that one. I think if you wanted to drop me a message after this, I could probably have a look. But usually that sometimes comes down to how the date filter is done. I found it sometimes if you're using depending on how the date filter is done, for some reason, I haven't quite figured it out yet, there is a bit of a discrepancy between the numbers. But yeah, I wouldn't know at the top of my head what your instance would be. But yeah, if you want to message me, I can probably have a look at that. And yes, people asking about there is going to be a recording of this video if you need to look at it again. Cool. Yeah. So I think that's it.
Yes,
well, thanks,
if you want to receive a follow-up, maybe drop me a note on LinkedIn with your email address, and we send an email blast once we publish the blog and publish the recording of this webinar.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks Windsor guys. This was great.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.